with all the partners who can assist us in delivering in it.
Thank you. That ends general question time. Before we come to the next item of business, I am sure members will join me in welcoming to the gallery the Ambassador of Croatia, His Excellency Ivan Grdišić. We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, let me first say I welcome Cara Hilton to the Chamber and congratulate her on her election. Based on her election literature, I am looking forward to her support at the budget for the key policies of this government.
Joanne Lamont.
Well, if the First Minister's budget includes a commitment to address the question of bedroom tax, we will, of course, support his budget. Does the First Minister agree with his Energy Minister, Fergus Ewing, that a freeze of gas and electricity bills is unworkable? Or does he agree with his Employment Minister, Angela Constance, who welcomed the idea?
Well, firstly, I look forward and I welcome Joanne Lamont's conversion to the SNP budget, and I look forward to her support. I thought when the conversion to the council tax freeze was perhaps a one-off, and now I realise there's going to be a full-scale conversion of the Labour Party to key SNP policies.
Mr McNeill, enough.
Let's look forward to that unanimity developing in this chamber. As has been said, we will consider all proposals to help with household incomes, and we'll do that seriously. But I have to say that sometime the Labour Party should give credit for the fact that by the end of this Parliament, for example, the council tax freeze will save the average family in Scotland some £1,400 in total over the period.
Joanne Lamont.
You would think with a fortnight off, the First Minister would have a think about doing his job properly. You know, the lesson of Dunfermline for the First Minister, which it would suit him to listen to, is that the people of Scotland want Scotland off pause and stop him obsessing about independence and do his day job. And as a bonus,
Ms. Graham.
And as a bonus, he might once in a while answer a question. I asked him what his view was on the energy freeze. He said nothing. So let's look at what Nicola Sturgeon's proposal for a price cut was in relation to energy. She says she will pay for it by moving green charges from the bill payer to the taxpayer, paying Peter by robbing Peter. What she didn't say is that the same report that gave her the idea also tells us that breaking up the single UK energy market could result in higher bills for Scots. Indeed, Citigroup estimates it would cost the average Scottish family an extra £225 a year. I think that is a better definition of unworkable. Rather than the bill payer or the taxpayer footing the bill, why won't the First Minister stand up to the big 6 energy companies on behalf of the people of Scotland and back a freeze?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, let's address the 2 weeks off. I've devoted, with others, a huge amount of time over the last 2 weeks in helping to save Grangemouth as a key part of the Scottish economy. I'm not quite certain what Joanne Lamont's role was in that. I thought her silence was trying to be helpful over the period. Now, she derides Nicola Sturgeon's proposal, but that hasn't been the view of people concerned with energy poverty in Scotland, who recognise that taking the energy efficiency schemes, indeed supplementing the energy efficiency programmes that we've kept in Scotland as they've been abolished south of the border, would not only save £70 a year, £70 reduction a year in electricity bills, but would also allow us to have a fuel poverty programme which was better integrated. Because we believe, and I think we're right, is that you're better having the government and the third sector and the fuel poverty organisations administer that programme than leave it to the big energy companies. I had a meeting with Ofgem yesterday, and they showed me some figures which indeed are extremely frightening. They suggest, this is the regulator, Labour's regulator actually, suggest that twice over the next two winters, we are facing a lack of margin over supply over demand, which could result certainly in brownouts, perhaps even in blackouts. That's lack of electricity supply. One of the things that will happen if we approach that situation of low margin is that prices will increase exponentially as people try desperately to get that last kilowatt of electricity. So two things are necessary if competition in this market is to be applied properly. Firstly, there has to be a surplus of supply over demand so that companies compete to supply people with electricity. And secondly, there has to be transparency in bills so as people can make that choice. That's why the Scottish Government's proposal to reduce electricity bills, in line with all our other action on household incomes, is a practical step. And that's why we've got real ideas, thought-out ideas, for getting the energy market under some sort of control.
Joanne Lamont.
First of all, can I say on the issue of Grangemouth, I think the First Minister's comments were unworthy of the significance of this issue. The people of Scotland.
Order.
My only focus on the issue of Grangemouth is ensuring that a workforce which has been loyal throughout this period is treated with respect, and on that, I'm sure across the chamber we are agreed. And if the First Minister imagines that what he has given as an explanation of his policy and of the Big Six policy will wear with families across Scotland who are being ripped off day and daily, he needs to go out and speak to people in our communities about actually what their experience is. So let's get this right, because I think the First Minister agrees with me that the Tories have got their energy policy wrong. David Cameron says he wants to move green charges to general taxation. Alex-Salmond rejects that policy and says he wants to move green charges to general taxation. It would almost seem that Alex-Salmond is closer to David Cameron than most of the Tory cabinet. But also,
Order.
settle
down. Order.
No, I know they don't like to hear it. However, who also backs the First Minister in the position he is taking? The Big Six energy companies. Even an ex-Tory Prime Minister, Sir John Major, is more radical than the First Minister. He wants a windfall tax on the energy companies. And what does the First Minister want? He wants to give these self-same companies a cut in corporation tax, 3 pence lower than whatever George Osborne sets it at. Once again, why won't the First Minister stand up to 6 big energy companies and back a price freeze?
First Minister.
Firstly, it was Joanne Lamont who argued that we'd spent 2 weeks doing nothing. I merely pointed out that most people would say that the action the Scottish Government took with others was successful in saving a key part of the Scottish economy and thousands of jobs. I think that's a reasonable point to make. And perhaps on reflection, she shouldn't have introduced the subject into this question time. But on the energy bills, I'm not certain that Joanne Lamont appreciates that the green charges and energy bills are a separate thing from the fuel poverty charges. The fuel poverty charges are things that we think should be taken into general taxation, supported by a number of the third sector organisations concerned with these things, because that's a more efficient, it's a fairer, it's a more equitable way to attack fuel poverty in Scotland. It would also result in a £70 reduction in energy bills, which by definition seems rather better than a freeze in energy bills. Now, we've said we'd consider any proposals, and we will consider any proposals. But I don't think we've had an answer yet to the problem of an energy freeze in 2015 or beyond, which is what happens if energy companies, as they are now, put up the energy bills before the freeze comes into place, and what happens if they put up bills after the temporary 16-month freeze. Now, if Labour can explain how they're going to tackle that issue, then I'm sure we'll give it the most active consideration. And the last thing I'd say is this. Yes, I think the Conservative Party attitude to this has been belated and blasé, and announcing a competition report just now seems far too late. But I do think we should remember who created the energy market we have at the present moment. It was the Labour Party who took price controls off Ofgem just after the year 2000. That's when they were removed. It was the Labour Party who created a market which had the big 6 energy companies in control. So it is really a bit rich for a party which has opposed every measure that the SNP has taken successfully to reduce household incomes, which created the mess of the energy market which we are now in, which has created jointly with the Tories a situation where in England there is so little capacity they could be facing blackouts twice over the next 5 years, to come along to this chamber and complain about a proposal from the SNP which everybody agrees is practical and enforceable, that will actually reduce energy bills by £70 a year. So let the Labour Party, given the new unanimity of backing the council tax freeze, backing our action to save family budgets across Scotland, back our action to address fuel poverty in Scotland as well.
Joanne Lamont.
So, for the absence of doubt, it's now clear that Alex-Salmond's position on the freeze on fuel is argued against in the exact same terms as David Cameron and the 6 big energy companies. What a council of despair. We can't take on these big companies because they'll do bad things just now to stop it being effective in the future. Stand up to them. Don't explain away what they are doing to people of this country. The First Minister says he wants Scotland to be a progressive beacon. Well, let's look at his record. During the banking crisis, he stood up for Fred Goodwin and the bankers. At the height of the million-dollar phone hacking scandal, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Rupert Murdoch.
Order!
And now, as families throughout the country are being ripped off for electricity and gas, he stands with the big 6 energy companies. Isn't it the case that this First Minister, who has cut £1 billion from anti-poverty schemes, doesn't stand with the families, the pensioner unable to heat their homes this winter? He stands with the energy companies who are ripping them off by offering them bigger tax breaks than even the Tories.
First Minister.
I'm going to say, for the party which knighted Fred Goodwin, and Alistair Darling had him as a key economic advisor throughout the financial crisis. It's a bit incredible. I think perhaps the central point is this. Joanne Lamont seems to have forgotten that we don't actually in this Parliament have the power over energy bills. And incidentally, unless I misheard her, she said there's going to be a fuel price freeze as well. We're actually talking about electricity prices, as every family in this country knows. And I'll tell you, just about every family in Scotland would like to see this Parliament and this Government have control over electricity regulation in Scotland. Because every family in this country knows that with Scotland's vast array of energy resources, it is an absolute disgrace that we have fuel poverty in this country. And every family in Scotland knows that we have maintained the fuel poverty programmes in the face of the cuts from Westminster. And every family knows that a £70 cut a year in electricity bills is better than a freeze which may or may not be delivered, where prices could increase before or afterwards. So the day that Joanne Lamont includes among her newfound welcome for SNP policies the support for the freeze on the council tax, then I'll tell her something for nothing. And what I'll tell her is this. that we look forward to the day that the Labour Party realises that the best way forward is to take control of the electricity markets and energy policy under the control and jurisdiction of this Parliament, so as we can act effectively in the interests of the Scottish people.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
No plans near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you. Today is the last day of consultation on police counter-closures. When I asked the First Minister earlier this month about shutting a third of police stations to the public, he justified the decision on the grounds of the number of people that were using them. In other words, on the footfall analysis. So can the First Minister tell me when this footfall analysis took place and if all police stations were included?
First Minister.
That was in the proposal when there was a 4-week period of survey. There was a number of stations which were surveyed over the period, and the statistics were given. It wasn't a comprehensive survey. That was the subject of the consultation. But all of this was in the documentation which was available to everyone 3 weeks ago, which, if I remember correctly, was one of the reasons I advised members of the Scottish Parliament to do their constituency duty and make representations based on their local knowledge, as indeed they should do. But there also is no doubt, as Ruth Davidson will remember from the survey, that among the stations surveyed, there were indications that in some of the stations which were actually surveyed, some actually recorded just one visit from the public for core police business. That was actually surveyed over the 4-week period. So I think it's right and proper that Police Scotland are having this consultation. I think it's right and proper that members of the Scottish Parliament and others, local communities, community councils, submit to the consultation to boot their representations. But I don't think even Ruth Davidson would argue that if the survey period did establish that some of these stations were having one police corps visit over a 4-week period, that she would seriously argue she wanted a police officer or a member of staff behind a desk as opposed to being in the communities doing effective police work on behalf of the people of Scotland.
Ruth Davidson.
I thank the First Minister for his answer, but the figures that he have given are slightly at odds with the figures that I have here, which is from the Police Scotland internal business case for cutting these services. And it shows that some of the information dates back as far as 2009. And that's important, because that's before more than 60 stations were either shut completely or had their hours reduced, which will have inevitably affected the number of people who are going to the police stations which are left, the very ones that this First Minister now wants to shut to the public. And even worse, for some rural stations, a footfall analysis wasn't done at all, they just guessed. So it is no wonder that this document itself says that the accuracy of the returns submitted and the ability to draw significant and accurate data is caveated due to the varying quality of the returns. In other words, police stations are set to close to the public because of out-of-date information which might never have been right in the first place. The First Minister's case for closing these police counters was based solely on the numbers. Does he agree that the flaws in these numbers now mean that his case has collapsed and he should save our stations?
First Minister.
This is the information that was freely available 3 weeks ago, which I answered in my first question by pointing out the survey had different applications over different stations, as indeed was contained in the documentation. But it doesn't alter the fact that a number of stations were surveyed over the 4-week period. And of these numbers, some actually recorded just one visit from the public for core police business. That is in the documentation. And I'm sorry Ruth Davidson hasn't managed to get to that paragraph, but it's definitely there in the documentation. Now, for the purposes of this consultation, wouldn't it be a reasonable thing for I was going to say an active constituency, but a member of the Scottish Parliament for Glasgow, like Ruth Davidson, to make proposals looking at the figures into the consultation to point out these things? But of course, given that she has a mind on public spending and recognises it wouldn't be the most sensible use of resources to have an officer or a member of staff behind a counter if indeed some stations surveyed had one visit in police business over a 4-week period, wouldn't it be a sensible thing to submit that to the consultation process and make these points? That is exactly the purpose of a consultation. But this comes against the reality that we have to suffer huge budget cuts from Westminster, that we have chosen in Scotland to accent the front line, that we have more than 1,000 more officers in place in the communities and streets of Scotland than we were when we took office. There has been a dramatic decline in police numbers south of the border. What's declining in Scotland is recorded crime. We've got the lowest crime rate for almost 40 years. And all of this tells you that we can trust Police Scotland to do an effective job on behalf of the communities of this country.
Supplement, a constituency question, Paul Martin.
Presiding Officer, on Friday the 18th of October, 8-year-old Brogan McCaig was attacked by 2 American bulldogs in the Gathamlock area of my constituency. I'm sure all of us in the chamber would wish Brogan a speedy recovery. However, Presiding Officer, there's much more we can do in this Parliament, and I wonder if the First Minister would agree with me that there needs to be more effective legislation in place to deal with dangerous dogs. And I wonder also if we'd agree to meet with me to discuss this matter further and with any other interested party.
First Minister.
Yes, if I may, Presiding Officer, can I give Paul Martin a fairly comprehensive reply? What is a very serious issue. Obviously, I agree from the sympathy of the whole chamber will go to Brogan and her family as she recovers from this ordeal. The 2 dogs involved in the attack have been put down. The man and woman who owned the dogs have been charged by the police with offences under the Dangerous Dogs Act. More generally, Scotland's approach to dealing with the problem of dangerous dogs is focused on measures helping to prevent attacks happening in the first place. All parties, of course, in the Parliament supported the Control of Dogs Act in 2010. We fully support local authorities making best use of this preventative regime. Alongside the dog control regime, we have long-standing criminal laws under the Dangerous Dogs Act back to 1991, holding owners to account who allow their dogs to be dangerously out of control. And the control notices obviously contain a number of conditions on owners and their dogs, including a requirement to keep dogs under control. Breach of dog control notice is, of course, a criminal offence. So these are the measures that this Parliament has taken and put in place in combination with our local authorities. But I'll be very glad indeed to meet Paul Martin and indeed his constituents if it would help to further discussion on this issue.
Question number 3, Will Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Will Rennie.
This weekend, the First Minister will be heading to China on his first visit to the country since he snubbed the Dalai Lama on his visit here. The First Minister shamed Scotland with his treatment of the Tibetan spiritual leader when he kowtowed to the Chinese Consul General. We are told he's heading east this weekend, but we've not been told what he will say on human rights. What will the First Minister do differently on his visit to China this time to be clear on human rights whilst developing economic partnerships?
First Minister.
Well, I'll do what I've done in all my visits to China. I'll meet the human rights organisations before the visit. I shall make speeches. I shall make representations. They're all in the public record if Willie Rennie cares to look at them. And I think that's a much more effective way to proceed in this matter. I'm not sure if Willie Rennie wants me to go to China. I mean, I'm meeting the human rights organisations beforehand. I've made a number of what some people said have been pretty significant speeches on this matter and representations on the matter of human rights when I've been in China before, because I think it's vitally important to have this engagement. And I think it's vitally important for economic reasons, obviously, but I think it's vitally important anyway. And when Willie Rennie comes and tells me what exactly about the points I've made in the past or the meetings with human rights organisations he objects to, then perhaps he'll come to this chamber and give me a bit more information to go on. And perhaps I should take ideas from Mr Rennie as to what he would do if he was in my position going to China next week. Or would he go to China at all?
First Minister. Will Rennie.
To do that, the Tubden Samduk, the Dalai Lama's Northern Europe representative, said of the First Minister that he had buckled under pressure from the Chinese government over the Dalai Lama. The Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister met the Dalai Lama, whilst the First Minister did not. The UK Government has shown that it's possible to be firm and clear with China on human rights and Tibet, whilst nurturing strong economic links. They were prepared to be firm with China whilst working with them. The last time he visited China, all he did was give the Chinese government a book. To send a clear message to China, will the First Minister commit today to meet the Dalai Lama? This is what he could do if he's listening. Will he commit today to send a clear message? He would meet with the Dalai Lama at the next possible opportunity.
First Minister.
So what I'll do is I'll raise the matter of human rights in China. Now, I shall send Willie Rennie a reference from the BBC website in terms of what was raised with then Vice Premier, now Premier Li Keqiang, when I was in China. Once Willie Rennie sees that, perhaps he'll come to this chamber and retract the suggestion that we didn't raise the issue of human rights in our visits to China. Can I also say that Professor Alan Miller, who I met before previous visit to China, very much agreed with the approach taken by the Scottish Government in terms of putting forward our argument about economic progress and human rights going together. I trust that Willie Rennie has examined the speeches where I made that point. And when he sees the exact reference in the BBC website, given what he's just said inaccurately to this chamber a few minutes ago, then perhaps at a suitable moment he'll have the grace to apologise for his mistaken remarks.
Question number 4, John Wilson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government will take to protect people affected by fuel poverty in light of recent price rises by energy providers.
First Minister.
Well, we've invested over £220 million on fuel poverty and energy efficiency programmes since 2009. That's an estimate net saving to household incomes in total over the lifetime of these measures of over £1 billion. In the exact terms, in terms of energy efficiency measures like draft-proofing and loft insulation, there's been 540,000 of these measures. We'll spend about £250 million over the next 3 years on fuel poverty and energy efficiency. Can I make the contrast with the actions of the Government in Westminster, when since the 1st of April there is no longer any government-funded fuel poverty programme south of the border?
John Wilson.
Minister for his response. Given that the most recent Scottish Government figures show that nearly 30% of households in Scotland are living in fuel poverty, does the First Minister agree with me that having once again increased prices at an unaffordable level, while wholesale prices have risen by only 1.7%, this serves as yet another insult to low-income households who are continually subjected to the whims of a dysfunctional energy market? Despite living in what we know to be a resource-rich Scotland, does he also agree that this is further evidence of the need for the powers of independence to eradicate fuel poverty in Scotland?
First Minister.
And I think we need a sustainable solution to the problem of energy bills, which is why, with the powers of independence, as John Wilson rightly says, we'll remove the cost of energy-saving measures and the warm home discount from household energy bills. Can I point out again what is absolutely essential in this, if we're getting sanity in this market, once we have the powers to do so? One, we need a surplus of energy supply over demand, so that companies actually have to compete to sell people energy. And secondly, we need proper efficiency and competition measures in this marketplace. It's absolutely crucial that we recognise that on the course of action set initially by the Labour Party and its structure, carried forward by the coalition government, that on the figures of the official regulator, England is heading towards at least brownouts, perhaps blackouts, twice over the next 5 winters. Now, we've not been in that situation since the 3-day week in 1974 in this country. This is what Ofgem told me yesterday. That is the risk if you assume economic growth into their figures. That is an extraordinary position for the security of energy supply. We had the Home Secretary talking about Scotland's security under independence. This Tory government can't even guarantee the security of electricity. And one of the benefits we have from independence is that we actually have a 20% margin of supply over demand in electricity. I think the Tories should relax. I and this government want to say we have absolutely no intention, given the difficulties that England are going to face in electricity supply, of turning that supply off. On the contrary, we will be delighted to sell them our renewable electricity.
Question number 5, Jackie Bailey.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government will take to deal with the reported underrepresentation of women on the boards and senior management teams of public bodies.
First Minister.
Well, on Tuesday, Equalities Minister Shona Robertson will be hosting a summit on women in public life, bringing together a range of stakeholders which will help shape further actions from the Scottish Government, identify ways to address the barriers faced by women from coming forward, as well as being appointed to boards. Now, our belief is that at least 40% of public board membership should be female. Legislative competence over introducing quotas currently lies with Westminster, as Jackie Bailey well knows, but Shona Robertson is working on seeking a Section 30 order to request that those powers are transferred to the Scottish Parliament so that we can address this issue. And in this new atmosphere of consensus, I look forward to Jackie Baillie joining the mainstream and supporting that transfer of powers to this Parliament.
Jackie Baillie.
Can I, as ever, thank the First Minister for that response? Because, of course, increasing female representation on boards and in the senior management teams of public bodies is an ambition that is shared across this chamber. But it is disappointing, I have to say, that the SNP and the First Minister default to their usual "we don't have the powers," because there are things we can do. Can we assume, therefore, Presiding Officer, that the First Minister supports his own government's diversity strategy, which was launched 5 years ago, and
Ms.
it
Baillie,
includes
one moment,
a target?
One moment. Can Mr Smith and Mr Fitzpatrick settle down, behave yourself, and allow Ms Baillie to ask the question?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can we assume that the First Minister supports his own government's diversity strategy, which was announced and launched 5 years ago, and includes a target of 40% of applications of board appointments coming from women? Can he therefore tell us why his government failed to reach that target, with the number of applications short by something like 25%, given that he already has the powers to do something about it?
First Minister.
Well, the reason I'm sorry that Jackie Baillie thinks I default to a position just because it's true. I default to the truth, and I look forward to Jackie Baillie's support for the Section 30 order. But I do think, listen, I do this in the context of saying that I think we need the power because I want to see that 40% target achieved. But I think Jackie Baillie does us less than justice in terms of the progress which has been made, because I actually have the application numbers and the new appointments, which she, I have to say, rather slided over in terms of interpretation of the question, because the actual figures in terms of application, the percentage of female applications have gone from boards to 29.8% in 2006-7 to 34%. Now, I accept that's not 40%, but it does represent progress. That was applications. In number of appointments, I'm coming to that right now, I'm glad you raised the point, has gone from 35% to 38%. Now, I agree. Well,
come on, grow up.
Well, given Labour's abysmal record that we inherited, we are more than halfway to our target of 40%.
Question number 6, Christina McKelvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the average financial benefit for households is from the council tax freeze.
First
Well,
Minister.
over the 6-year period, the council tax freeze has been in place. The average Band D household has benefited from cumulative savings of almost £680. And by extending the freeze for the lifetime of this Parliament, that same household will have benefited by around £1,200.
Christina McKelvey.
Thank the First Minister for that answer, and I'm sure that information provides much-needed relief for families in Scotland struggling with the Better Together's party's commitments to continue to squeeze budgets of Scotland's families. Can the First Minister take some comfort in the published commitments from Labour last week to support the universal benefits protected by this SNP government, or does he think what Labour says in elections is different from what Labour says in this chamber?
First Minister.
I have to say, what I'm trying to reconcile is the varying positions of Joanne Lamont, who said that she didn't say a something-for-nothing society, when actually she did say a something-for-nothing society. I actually, when I heard her on television on Sunday say that I never said that some people get something for nothing, I was moved to go to the Labour Party website to find the speech from last year and got the message, "Oops, the page you're looking for cannot be found." Luckily, our ever-searching staff had taken a screen grab. And, of course, the speech does include the phrase, "Scotland cannot be the only something-for-nothing country in the world." Indeed, so significant was it that Joanne Lamont actually won an award from the Herald for her speech. She waved the politician away for political impact hitting out at Scotland's something-for-nothing culture. So on the one hand, we have Labour's position in the by-election, which was to support the council tax freeze. Then their position with Unison, which is to oppose the council tax freeze. Last year it was something for nothing. Now that has been eradicated from the Labour Party website. So if I could say to Christina McKelvey, I think the problem is that Labour are caught saying one thing in public and then another thing in public.
That ends First Minister's questions. We now move on to members' debate. I'll allow a short pause for members who are not taking part in the debate to leave and for the public gallery to clear before we move to members' business.